more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Well, hi, Julia. Welcome back, everyone, to the Sense of Beer Style. Again, this is going to be a fun one because today we're going to talk about Rye IPA, or as I say, many other people say, Rye IPA.
And India Pale Ale IPA.
IPA
stands for India Pale Ale.
But just to be clear, when you look at the style guidelines, this beer style does not come from India. So IPA it's implied that stands for India Pale Ale, but as a style, it really is just meant to be Rye IPA. But just so you know, there's the background in different ways there. Julia, I know you're a home brewer. I'm a home brewer, and one of the things I love about home brewing is I don't have to follow any rules. There are no style police that are come knocking on my door. And so many, many, many times I've taken this beer and I thought, what if I add this? And this usually becomes some interesting experiment that either goes horribly awry or turns into something just magnificent and beautiful and memorable. I have a sneaky suspicion that the Rye IPA is one of those beers that was made popular by home brewers, and the commercial brewers thought, hey, I think they're onto something. We should try that. And a new style is born. Would you agree with that theory?
I do, and the style guidelines even attributes home brewers as really making it popular and bringing it to life. So, yeah, home brewers are still the innovative hubs of craft beer and also the whole world beer scene, in my view.
Yeah, and if I were telling a completely different story, I would say that home brewers are on the tip of the spear and need to be considered as such. But like I said, that's a different story for a different time. Let's talk about the ingredients. We know there's rye, we know there's IPA. What other ingredients go into this?
I would say that Rye IPA is going to elicit each person's version of what rye represents. Think rye bread, right? Think the rye crackers, but how spicy does that rye get? The style guidelines mentions in the ingredients, no caraway seeds should be added. Yeah. So don't go that far. But basically the ingredients for a Rye IPA is an American IPA, right? Standard kind of pale base American malt, which is easy to say there. American ale yeast, usually New World, if not American, definite hops. So you've got the basis there of an IPA, but then adding that rye is going to take things to another level. The rye can get 10% even, make things more bitey, spicy, give the beer a red hue and a finish, like a color. So if you're trying to see if it's a red IPA, look for that red hue. It influences the color of the beer. But it can be just a little bit spicy, or more like a rye bread on the flavor. It all just depends on how much rye that individual brewer added.
Yeah. And you brought up something really important. I want to make sure we highlight this. Rye is not the same thing as caraway. Caraway is often goes together in rye bread. It's often associated with the same thing. There's an incredible synergy there. I am madly in love with rye bread, given the option. But caraway and rye are two very different things. So if you're not exactly sure what they are, go get some rye grain and get some caraway seeds from the store and play with them.
Great sensory experiment to suggest.
Absolutely.
Good call.
So let's talk about, you started alluding to the appearance of this. So as a average beer style, every beer is going to be a little bit different, of course, but the Rye IPA is really going to be anywhere from like a medium gold to kind of a reddish amber, kind of getting into that copper range. It can be clear, can be a little bit hazy. There's no There's no defined mandated kind of thing there as far as what it has to be. It just kind of depends on how the beer is made. We can expect that it will have a medium white off or off medium to white off white head. Try and say that 5 times fast, especially when you're drinking one of these things. But it should have a really good persistence. If you pour it well, if it's in a good glass, that foam should last for quite a while, and it really is beautiful. I have to admit, it's been a while since I found one of these things, but God, they're just wonderful when you find them. But that's the appearance. What does it smell like?
So, going over the 2021 Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines, now we go to aroma. Jeremy will take flavor next. And in the aroma, American IPA and then the specialty, and we're talking about Rye IPA as a specialty IPA, it's always going to be more intensely hop forward than malt. So the aroma is going to lead with, and the guidelines even talk about prominent to intense hop aroma. That's really significant because you're looking for that first. The hop aromas would be those American hops of the pine in the forest or the tropics, and tangerine and clementine type of aromas. And you're going to also though look for the rye in this. If it's not displaying rye in the aroma, it's not doing its job. If it's declaring to be a rye IPA, you want to see that in the aroma and indications obviously in the flavor. So a low peppery rye malt aroma is called for. At least it's got to be on the Richter scale in some form. It's not optional. And then you've got some ale yeast, clean fermentation, maybe some esters are going to showcase, but that's optional. And then a little bit of ethanol, because in the IPA category, you're getting to a range of alcohol that should show up both when you smell it and when you taste it.
Yeah. When you get to the flavor of it, so I'm gonna make a quick analogy. Imagine listening to a song with dueling guitars, like the Eagles' "Hotel California," for example, and you're trying to focus on one guitar at a time to understand what that guitarist is doing. To me, you kind of need to do that. If you're studying this beer style, you need to do the same thing just with the malt alone. And what I mean by that is we have the base malt, we have the barley malt, and that's going to be kind of a low to medium low. It's going to give you notes of maybe a little bit of caramel, maybe a little bit of toastiness if it's there, but that's just the barley malt. Now we need to start talking about the rye. The rye is going to be a low to medium. It's going to be grainy. It's going to be spicy. It's going to give that impression of texture, even though we're talking flavor. But it can be a little bit spicy. I've noticed that what rye in my beer tends to be a little bit herbal and earthy, and even twiggy is a way that I describe this too. Is just as a flavor. But so we need to think about the barley malt and the rye malt separately. But that rye is also going to add to a fairly dry finish. It's just the way it works. It really dries out that finish. So but we're still talking about the Rye IPA. We are going to have the American New World hops that can be medium to very high because it's an IPA. So we're looking for the flavor of a forest, of citrus, of berries, of tropical flavor. But that's the flavor of the hops. The bitterness is going to be medium high to very high. Again, we're in IPA land. It's going to be bitter. It should all be in balance, but that bitterness is going to be prominent. And then we're talking about the esters. If they're there, they should be quite low. And frankly, I prefer that they are there because they add a nice little counterbalance to this earthy, spicy, and this hoppy bitter. Just have these beautiful fruit notes. But that finish again is going to be dry, partly because of the hops, partly because of the rye. And then lastly, one of the things I'm looking for is the alcohol and the flavor. You can taste it. To me, it tastes a little bit more like a peppermint kind of pop that doesn't just kind of shine all the way through the palate. It's usually mid palate kind of pop, and then it's gone. But that if it's there, it should be quite low and just kind of in balance with everything else. That's what I expect of an average example for the flavor. But let's talk about the mouthfeel.
Well described, Jeremy. Thank you. Mouthfeel is nothing surprising if you're used to IPAs. It is going to be medium light to medium body, not over the top, and yet definitely noticeable, right? And they call the texture to be smooth or, lightly creamy. That's good. Medium to medium high carbonation. I do want the carbonation to help dry these beers out, refresh my palate, make me want another sip. So carbonation is an aspect of the mouthfeel to look for. And you don't want it too harsh or too much emphasis on the alcohol, but a pretty straightforward mouthfeel for sure. What about style comparison?
Well, and this one's kind of easy because okay, it's an IPA. So let's compare this Rye IPA to a regular American IPA that we talked about in a different style cast. They should be very, very similar, except the Rye IPA, because of that addition of rye, is going to be just a little bit spicier, maybe just a little bit creamier because of the way that the rye manifests in the mouthfeel. It can be a little bit more twiggy or earthy than you'd expect other ones to be. Um, in that rye, the dryness, the bitterness just tends to linger on a little bit longer, all the way through the flavor into the finish. And so, if you're paying attention, and if you're tasting them side by side, you can tell that the rye just has a little bit longer lasting effect. The other beer that I would compare this to, another rye beer that we will talk about in a different style cast, would be the Rogan beer. But there really isn't that much comparison. The Rogan beer is basically, I think, imagine anyone who's listened to this before knows I must be a product of the 70s because I love the beer, love children. But imagine a rye beer and a German Weiss beer got together, they had a baby, that'd be a Rogan beer. So it's almost like a rye version of a German wheat beer. There's not a lot of comparison there, though, other than they both happen to have rye. So I'm just going to leave that right there and put a exclamation mark on that and let you guys work through that when you can. But that's the style comparison. Let's talk about commercial examples.
Great job, Jeremy. And commercial examples, you might come to mind because they've been such good job at marketing and maybe they snuck it back, but they certainly don't feature it on their website anymore. Sierra Nevada, Ruthless Rye. It's how many people started to say, oh, wow. There's also not listed in the style guidelines, Bear Republic Hop Rod Rye, which was frankly my first rye IPA, and I don't think they make it anymore. These beers should come back, though it's based on sales. So when you see beer styles that you love that are fringe, you got to buy them, or the breweries just might decide not to keep making them. There's also Founders Red Rye IPA, which has turned a lot of people on to rye IPA. And as Jeremy always says and reinforces, and I do too, if you can't find it, brew it. We have recipes on homebrewerassociation.org. Many places you could literally Google rye IPA and get some kind of recipe that will get you there. And I mentioned earlier, 10% rye, it can go to 30 or 40% rye. The catch is when you're brewing with rye, and especially if you're a commercial brewer, you're smart enough to know you can get something called a stuck mash. And so you have to add something called rice hulls to help your mash tun not get stuck. So the actual extract is still draining through your false bottom. So working with rye is a bit tricky. So that's even more reason to appreciate this style is they're harder to make for sure. That's why they're harder to find, but it doesn't mean you can't still have it in your beer fridge because you could still brew it.
Yeah, and I think that's why they can be a little bit spicy because you can almost taste the brewer cussing in the brew house.
That's good stuff. That was
Right?
well done there.
Yeah. So let's talk about vital stats. When you look at the ABVs and the IBUs of all these specialty IPAs, there really is a tight grouping for the most part. And it's really neat to see. And if you're studying this, if you have to memorize this information for whatever reason, advanced Cicerone or BJCP Judge, it becomes pretty easy to remember because they're all kind of variations of each other, and there is a pattern there. When we look at the ABV, for example, the ABV for the Rye IPA is 5.5 to 8 in comparison to it's not really a base beer, but I'm going to call it a base beer. The American IPA is 5.5 to 7.5. The Rye IPA is just a little bit more on the higher end. When we're looking at the IBUs for the Rye IPA, we're talking 50 to 75. The base American IPA is 40 to 70. So for whatever reason, this one just tends to be a little bit more bitter on average. So we can talk about that in terms of original gravity. It's all correlated to the ABV. So we're looking at 1056 to 1075. If you're outside the U.S. and you prefer Plato, we're looking at 14 to 18.5, give or take. when we talk about the final gravity and how that really manifests in mouthfeel, this could go a little bit drier, like it can, but there can be a little bit of body to it, which I prefer because it is going to kind of a dry finish and be a little bit bitter. So having a little bit of body just really adds balance to it. But this can be, final gravity wise, a 10.8 to 10.14, which is perfect. For a final Plato, we're talking 2 to 3.5. Color wise, we already talked about that. This is really hovering between medium gold to kind of a reddish amber, maybe a little bit copper. And that puts us in 6 to 14. 14 for me, 14, 15 is right in the copper range. So we're just starting to touch into it. Again, for people outside the US, we're looking at EBC. We're just double that. We're looking at 12 to 28. And those are the vital stats that we're looking at for the average of the style. But now let's talk about what kind of glass would you drink it in, Julia?
I got glass on my mind for sure. It's an easy peasy one where I just do avoid the standard shaker pint glass, which is made for cocktails. But it's an
Yep.
American IPA. I'm going to drink this 12, 16 ounces at a time. And I do want it in a bigger glass that has room for that carbonation and aromatics to volatilize out. So a Nonic shaker pint or a Willy Becker from Germany. You don't know what those are. Certainly look them up. And frankly, Jeremy, we should get those on our website, senseofbeerstyle.com, to show people, because you and I go back to those two types of glassware very, very often.
Yep. Yep.
And then
Yeah,
drinking
we
temperature.
definitely have our favorites.
We really do. We really do. And drinking temperature, because you asked that too, I would want this at that, 40, 45 degree Fahrenheit, 5 to 7 Celsius range. I don't want it too cold. 38 degrees Fahrenheit's okay, but I'm going to want it to warm up. And I don't want it cellar temperatures too, above 45 in Fahrenheit range. It's going to get to, I don't want it like a cask conditioned ale. I like the sharp bite of that carbonation. I want it colder. And I want to drink it in kind of that medium range of temperature, not too warm and not too cold.
And as far as pairing goes, this is going to be fun. I love getting to go first just because I get to kind of get my stuff out. Then I can just sit back and listen to what you have to say, Julia. So I'm going to go first. For this beer, because of that dryness, because of that spicy herbal twiggy flavor that I get from the rye, I really want something that is kind of creamy with a big flavor that really could utilize that herbal essence, if you will. And for me, having a good Italian risotto with maybe some sausage and some sun-dried tomatoes would be incredible, because that really comes out to, if you make it right, it should come out just a little bit creamy with the butter. This would be perfect with the Rye IPA. And by extension, I would love to take everyone to Valencia, Spain, and have a nice paella grilled by the seashore, and have a Rye IPA with a Spanish chorizo and a shrimp paella. That would just be phenomenal. For people who don't really want to eat meat, if you're vegetarian, I mentioned this before, I would love to have some grilled portobello mushrooms, maybe some grilled fennel, some grilled polenta. This would be incredible with those flavors.
I love all of that, and I will add to it. I want this to elicit the pumpernickel bread, or bridge to pumpernickel bread. How about a corned beef sandwich? Something that's little rich, little definitely salty, and then on pumpernickel bread, which has rye flour in it. I'm going to really want it with that sandwich, and I think it's going to go great. I also then want it on the side, or for dessert, some ginger snap cookies. I could see ginger going really well with that bitey, sharp bite of rye. And the beer in those cases and instances, in true pairing, it's not just beverage to food back and forth because it's drink and quench thirst to calories and fulfill and sustain yourself. It's because they work together, right? They find each other in certain ways. Yeah. And in what I just described in the two, at least to defend it, I would say that the beer is almost acting like the bread, right? Or it's acting like a sauce drizzled over those cookies. So I love those two pairings, and I can't wait to try it soon.
Yeah. Otherwise, this is becoming an uncommon beer style. I don't see it very often. It's hard to find. But if you can find it, make sure you grab a couple of them, taste them side by side with their similar beers, with a regular IPA, with a red IPA. Just kind of see how they're different, and that would be a great education. And if you can't find one, well, then you can always go brew it. But it is a very interesting style, has an interesting flavor profile that you don't really get in any other beer. So find it, brew it, try it, love it. It's incredible.
Hear, hear. Well said, and thanks for listening.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
and me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.